The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, CHD. Welcome to Pediatric Perspectives. We are looking at children's health challenges from a different perspective, one that includes critical thinking, one that's not afraid to give you the honest truth. I've been looking forward to this interview, Dr. Ronald Whitmont. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Paul.
You are not only an MD and former president of the American Institute of Homeopathy, but you have an interesting background. Your father was a practicing homeopath, and you're currently, I believe, the president of the National Homeopathic Product Certification Board and medical advisor to Americans for Homeopathy Choice.
That's correct. And I'm also in private practice of classical homeopathy here in New York State.
Wow. Awesome. And practicing, I understand, since 1995, as far as homeopathy goes.
That's correct. Yes.
Well, I'm a relative beginner, if you will, to homeopathy. I know a little bit, enough just to realize that I don't know what I'm doing. So I better find someone like you to help my patients. And I'm retired, so it's not directly. Now I'm educating. So we're here to get educated by you on homeopathy. And I wondered if you might start off with a little history. I think since your dad was a homeopath, you had some background as a child, I'm sure. But then, tell us about homeopathy, the history of it, and take it from there.
So homeopathy, many people think it's really an old system of medicine like acupuncture or traditional Chinese medicine, but it's not. Homeopathy has only been around formally for about 250 years. And in the United States, only since around 1810. When it was first introduced here in the United States. It came out of Germany. A physician named Samuel Christian Hahnemann was the physician who actually formally studied homeopathy and studied medicine and developed the whole system that we now know today as homeopathy. And he came about this sort of in a not in a direct way. He had practiced medicine, and at the time it was a pretty barbaric form of medicine in the 1700s. And he was translating a text from a Scottish pharmacist who was describing how the treatment at the time for relapsing fever, which we now know as malaria, but it was a bark that came out of Peru called Peruvian bark. And we now know it contains quinine, and it was effective for the treatment of relapsing fever. And the pharmacist who describes it said it was effective because it was a very astringent herb. And Hahnemann questioned this and said, "This is absurd. I know many astringent herbs that don't treat relapsing fever." He then had this brilliant idea to actually test the herb on a healthy person, and he used himself. And later on, he began testing more and more. But the concept of actually doing drug testing prior to administration was a completely novel idea, and one of the first scientific approaches to medicine ever taken. He went on to systematically test almost 100 substances in his lifetime. And he found that there was a general rule or phenomenon that that described the process of treating something to bring about a cure. And that was a medicine is most effective in curing a situation when it produces a state of similar symptoms in a healthy person, meaning the person who took the quinine or the Peruvian bark at the time started getting symptoms of fever and malaise and illness that very closely paralleled the symptoms of the actual disease of malaria. So it turned out to be a general principle of use. And he then went on in a very scientific manner to test this hypothesis out for different herbs, different minerals, different animal-based substances, and eventually used it to treat those who were ill. and found it incredibly successful.
Huh.
And that was the birth of homeopathy. After that, there were more principles that were described, but that's the fundamental one, and that's called the law of similars.
The other thing that I've found to be intriguing about homeopathy is the dosing. I think there's a minimal dose concept. And I think for Western trained doctors like myself, when you initially hear about the process of making the dilutions, and maybe you can expand on that a little bit, you get to the point where there's almost nothing molecule-wise left in the solution. How does that work?
Well, to be more precise, there's really nothing chemical left in the solution. This is one reason why homeopathic medicines have an extremely safe record. They're probably the safest form of medicine anywhere in the world because of this process of preparation, where they're made in essentially what we call ultramolecular dilutions or nano medicine dilutions. There has been recent research over the last 10 to 15 years describing that there is substance in homeopathic medicines, but they're nanoparticles of the original source material. And this has been confirmed in a dozen or so laboratories around the world. When they do these dilutions to very high levels, there are always these nanostructures of the original substance left. That has a really interesting side effect, if you will, and that is that when you give very, very tiny amounts of substance, you have to be very exacting in your prescription. So you cannot just prescribe on the basis of a diagnosis the way we do in conventional Western medicine, which is, someone has high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease, you just blanket their system with a drug in large enough quantities to affect a change. It doesn't work that way in homeopathy. In order to use the ultramolecular prescription, you have to be very specific about who and what you're treating. And as I mentioned briefly before, this is done through the drug proving process, and the way that we test the homeopathic medicines, we get very precise information about what each medicine is capable of producing in a healthy person. We turn that around, and you're matching a fingerprint of a healthy person who's taken the drug to a fingerprint of someone who is actually ill with a disease, and you are putting those two together in the prescription. So you have to be very exacting. It takes a lot more time than a conventional cookbook method of treatment. And it is actually curative in many, many situations, which is really remarkable when you consider conventional medicine doesn't really cure that much, but it's really good at suppressing the symptoms and hiding the disease.
Yeah. Back to medical school. Diagnose and treat, right? Label and treat. Find some symptoms, give them a name. Here's your drugs. Help me understand, and for the audience to understand, because this has always baffled me. The more dilute the homeopathic solution is, the more potent it is.
So this is part of the law of the minimum dose. And there's a lot of confusion about this. And this is one of the ideas that is used to kind of debunk homeopathy and to accuse homeopathy of not following the laws of physics. And this is complete hogwash. It does follow the law of physics, and it follows the law of science, because this is a phenomenon that we see repeatedly in practice, that you cannot explain it on chemical or kind of Newtonian physical physics. We know it is a phenomenon that works. We know that homeopathy works. It's been given, there is something called agrohomeopathy, where plants are treated, and these tests have been repeated and confirmed. There's a field of veterinary homeopathy where animals, livestock, pets, even large animals have been treated using homeopathic medicines. They know the difference between a placebo and a verum, or the real medicine. And it's been used successfully, even in my practice, for people who are unconscious. And they also respond to homeopathic medicines and not to placebos. Very early in my career, I wanted to try giving placebos to kids and found it doesn't work. You can't give them placebos. They're wiser than that. But so to explain this process, no one can explain it, Paul, because there hasn't been enough research into it to know. We know there's a phenomenon called hormesis, which is kind of what we call a biphasic response curve, meaning it's non-linear, that in very, very small doses, a medicine can actually stimulate, where in large doses, the same medicine can suppress. And we know this is true with pheromones. We know it's true with hormones. We know it's true with many normal physiological processes. They respond to very minute quantities of things in your body. So it's not anything that defies physics. It's just a matter of, you have to recognize that homeopathy has been opposed by the conventional medicine system ever since its inception, more than 200 years ago, because we are a threat to conventional pharmacology. We are a threat to the whole process of drug manufacturing, because we do it in a different way and in a much more ecologically sound way.
Yeah. And I know in homeopathy, you talk, at least in many cases, of treating the whole person, not just a symptom thing. And also, of course, boy, have we learned through the last few decades the importance of the immune system. And what we went through with COVID and all of that. How does homeopathy address the whole person and the immune system?
Well, so Paul, it's kind of a misnomer because there is no form of medicine that doesn't address the whole body or the whole system. It's just that homeopaths intentionally address the whole body. And any conventional medicine, any pharmaceutical drug you take affects your whole body, but conventional physicians call those things side effects. They call them unintended drug effects, where in fact, if you look at the pharmacology of the drug, we know that those are the things that the drug does. It's just that they have ignored everything from the neck down if they're treating the head, or they ignore everything outside the heart if they're treating the heart, where the homeopath has recognized from the outset that the entire body operates the way an ecosystem operates in the environment. You can't treat one animal in an ecosystem and not have it impact the entire ecosystem. And the same is true with the body. Homeopaths have been doing this because they found that it was most effective when they did it this way. They found that if they individualized the treatment and gave something that was consistent with what's happening in one part of the body and was also consistent with the other, their success rate was multiplied. If you treat one part of the body and ignore everything else, you get some success, but you're not nearly as effective as when you're treating the whole body as a holistic system or as an ecosystem. And that's what we've learned even from microbiome science, which is telling us, and maybe physicians will finally listen, that the body is an ecosystem and it cannot exist in separation from the environment. It cannot exist. You cannot treat one organ in separation from another organ. You're just going to create toxic problems. And that's what we see in conventional medicine most of the time.
Yeah. If I'm a parent listening, I am a parent, although my kids are grown. I'm used to the way I was raised. I've got a symptom. My kid's got a fever. They might even have a traditional label of strep throat or a common cold or asthma, you name it, right? Do you have different approaches in homeopathy for certain symptoms and then others for certain conditions, or is it always the whole person?
It's not always the whole person, no. And you can see that most clearly in the use of the medicine Arnica montana, which is an herb that's available over the counter in homeopathic form in most health food stores. And you don't have to individualize at all. And you notice it's quite effective in cases of trauma or even post-operatively, or after going to the dentist, or anything where tissue has been manipulated or traumatized. For some reason, that medicine is very effective. So no, you do not always treat the whole body, although you like to and you try to whenever you can. And dealing with acute problems, you tend to narrow your focus. You tend to focus on what are the presenting symptoms in that particular ear infection or throat infection, as you're describing, and you focus in on that. You're still looking for any symptoms that are coming through the entire body. So you're looking, if someone has a sore throat, do they have a headache? Do they have an earache? Are they coughing at the same time? And you're looking to treat that as a complex system. Not just as one isolated thing. We don't give, if you're practicing classical homeopathy, you don't give one medicine for the throat that hurts, another medicine for the ear, and a third medicine for the headache. You look for that medicine that encompasses that entire picture, and that is going to be your most effective medicine to deliver a resolution, not to suppress the symptoms and hide it. To resolve it.
So I think, as a classically trained pediatrician for a long time, till I started waking up to what was going on in that diagnose and treat model that I was trained in, we end up reaching for antibiotics a lot. And I'm guessing in homeopathy medicine, you rarely are using antibiotics.
Yeah. Very rare is the right word.
Explain that. How does that work?
Well, remember, as a conventionally trained pediatrician, you don't have very many tools in your toolbox. You've got antibiotics, you've got steroids, you've got alpha blocking agents, and you've got things that are basically, you were told how to use these things. But if someone's coming in with an infection, you don't have any other tools. Where I have thousands of medicines that, if I can find the match, any one of them can work. They're not antibiotics, and they don't work like antibiotics in the body. And this is the other parallel that we have with the microbiome and the environment, is that we're not trying to kill the bugs. We're trying to help balance the immune system and balance the microbiome so that those bugs are living back in integration with the rest of the body. You don't get healthy by eliminating bacteria. You get less and less healthy by eliminating bacteria. That science is now recognizing that all of these organisms are integral to human health. And the more you limit them and the lower the diversity of the microbiome in the human body, the sicker the person is, the more susceptible they are to recurring illnesses, the longer they take to recover from acute illnesses, and the more likely they are going to develop a chronic inflammatory condition. And these are the results of using this conventional model that you're describing as a pediatrician, where you use antibiotics for everything. And now we start to see, when this all comes home to roost, we have one of the sickest generations of kids that we've ever had in this country. In fact, probably in the history of civilization, we've never had kids with this number of chronic inflammatory illnesses. 40% of kids have one or more chronic inflammatory illness.
Yeah, it's horrendous.
It's horrendous.
It's horrendous. I got so many things I want to ask you about. Maybe let's start with something simple for parents who have young children or they're about to have kids. Are there certain homeopathic remedies they should just have on hand? And if so, what are they? Where do they get them? How do they learn how to use them?
So there's nothing simple about that question, Paul. Sorry. I would say anyone starting out with homeopathy really should be seeking to consult with someone who knows about homeopathy, a homeopathic physician, a homeopathic naturopath, also they are physicians, a homeopathic consultant, a homeopathic professional. And the reason is, it's daunting in my pharmacopoeia There are a couple thousand medicines that are kind of approved by the Homeopathic Pharmacopoeia of the United States. And there is even more homeopathic medicines that haven't been approved that are still around and can be purchased. Determining which medicine to use at which time is very challenging, even for an experienced practitioner. So there are books that you can get. One of them is called Homeopathic Medicine at Home, or Everyone's Guide to Homeopathy. There are online services that are available, ABC Homeopathy, but you should be consulting with someone who's had some experience with homeopathy. And the reason for that is, there's multiple reasons. And one is just to know what's treatable and what's not. And the other is, what are the limits for when you should be treating and when you should be going to the emergency room. And then the other part is having access to the homeopathic medicines. It turns out that homeopathic medicine kits, boxes containing an assortment of different homeopathic medicines, have been available for purchase for a couple hundred years here in the United States. And you can still purchase these from a reputable homeopathic pharmacy. And there's many here in the United States that you can buy them from. And they can provide, the one that I recommend to my clients is a 50 medicine kit. So they have 50 medicines at their disposal should they be in a situation either where they can't reach me or they can't come into the office. And that can provide a real important stopgap measure where they can start treatment immediately. And then you have to either be consulting with someone or you have to have a good book at your side that helps you reach that prescription. And as a parent, I'm a parent also. I've had 2 kids who are now grown up, but it is very hair-raising to try to treat your own children.
If you had an infant with possible pertussis, is there a homeopathic approach?
Yes. And homeopathy has been used to treat pertussis for at least 100 years, quite successfully. And the approach again is, we do have a reflex series of medicines that we give when someone is having an acute bout of pertussis or whooping cough or, asthma or croup and things like that. There are different protocols that we follow. But primarily, you need to know when someone is really, really young, that's the critical time when you have to be very careful. And I guess it's less than 6 months of age. You have to be very careful how you treat, and you've got to be ready to pick up and go to the emergency room if your treatment is not effective. Homeopathy is not effective in everyone that we treat. It's highly effective. But you never know when a medicine is going to work or not, or whether you're going to prescribe the right medicine or not. And generally, faster than when you give a conventional drug because they're very fast acting. But they can also, you can run into roadblocks and impediments. So in terms of treating something like whooping cough or pertussis, most of the time when I'm treating that condition, it's not in the acute stage, it's in the chronic stage. So we have a child or even an adult who is coming in with a chronic recurring cough or a cough that just won't go away. And essentially what we're looking at is, again, matching the right medicine with that person. And to do that, sometimes you are looking at whatever that person's constitutional medicine is, that's a whole nother discussion about how do you arrive at that. And sometimes you're going off this very specific modalities of that cough. And if you are a conventional doctor, as you said, you want to know the diagnosis. You don't really care about anything else. But as a homeopath, I want to know, does that cough get better or worse when that person goes to bed? Does that cough get better or worse when they eat or they drink? Does it get better or worse if they're indoors or they're outdoors, if they're hot or they're cold? All of those indications are reading the very fine lines of the fingerprint for the medicine that's going to be appropriate for that person, not the diagnosis. We're treating the person, and that person will express that diagnosis in a whole range of different ways, depending upon who they are, what their immune system is like, what their microbiome is like, how they've been treated in the past, so many different, and what their genetics are. So many different things come into play. And the homeopaths cut through that by individualizing on the basis of their symptoms. And that leads us like a flashlight to what the right medicine is.
If I'm a parent and I'm really interested in this approach, which I would be interested because I've seen what mainstream approaches are doing and it's not good.
No.
I need to get a hold of you. Are you available to take consultations?
Yeah. I have.
How do people get a hold of you?
Well, they call my office. They look up my name. They Google me. They find that I have an office in Dutchess County, New York, and I have a receptionist who will pick up the phone. They can check my website. If they Google me, they'll find a website also and find me that way. So any of those places.
Okay. Are you able to do remote consultations?
Yes.
Wonderful. I've got a specific question I've always wanted to ask somebody with your level of experience, and that is about the homeoprophylaxis, that alternative to traditional vaccines that I know is available, I think, for pretty much any childhood disease for which there's a vaccine. There's a homeoprophylaxis option. Is that true? And what do you think of that approach?
Good question. So first of all, there's a lot of research that's been done on homeoprophylaxis. And there's a guy named Isaac Golden in Australia who's done a lot of this work and really has tabulated the results and looked at the effects of homeoprophylaxis. You have to be very clear, though, homeoprophylaxis is not legally an alternative to vaccination. And I say that, and I put that word legally in there quite intentionally. So homeoprophylaxis is in most states not accepted in place of a conventional vaccine. However, the data suggests it is highly efficacious and highly effective in preventing these illnesses. And that ranges, in my direct experience, things like malaria, all the way to things like pertussis and whooping cough. And there is a methodology for using homeoprophylaxis. And as long as someone who uses it has been fully informed that it is not a vaccine, and it certainly does not carry the risks of vaccines, but it may or may not carry the same benefits, depending again on those other factors that I described, which are, what is that individual state of health, and what can you do to bolster? But there have been one of the largest studies on homeoprophylaxis was performed in Cuba. And this involved over 2.5 million people in Cuba who needed a vaccine for leptospirosis, which is an annually recurring infectious illness. And they were not able to manufacture the vaccine in time. So someone down there in one of the state-run pharmacies actually got them to do mass preparation of a homeoprophylactic medicine that was distributed to 2.5 million people. And there was also a control group of people they couldn't reach to deliver the medicine to. And there was definitely a significant beneficial effect from using the homeoprophylactic dose. And they tried to publish these results in the medical journals here in the United States, and they were across the board rejected because, as you know, there are politics and there is a lot of money at stake, and there are reputations at stake. If someone, it's career suicide to say you believe in homeopathy or you've used homeopathy and you're part of a university program in medicine. That's really a dangerous place to be because it's politically unfavorable.
Yeah.
So homeoprophylaxis is a real thing. I would warn people, be very careful, make sure you're going to someone who really knows what they're doing. But it has been studied, and it needs a lot more study because as it is, we don't know how long a homeoprophylaxis result will last. We know that the vaccines aren't producing permanent immunity. We know that the only thing that really does is experiencing an exposure to the actual illness. Those things like measles, that produces lifelong immunity. We need much more research into the area to know what are the parameters for this.
Yeah. No, I agree. I had a classically trained homeopath MD pediatrician in my office, and we were doing this. And I can tell the audience, you don't get antibodies. So the traditional system will not accept this as a vaccine because they want to see you've got an antibody response. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's really the cellular immunity response that's more important anyway.
No, you're right. No, you're right.
And that's all you get with vaccines is an antibody response, and you miss that whole first line of defense of cellular immunity.
Yeah.
So I'm a fan of it. I absolutely am. I'm going to have you back to talk about microbiome because I missed your incredible lecture, but I heard about it and I said, okay, I'm getting this guy back. But to wrap up today's session, I wanted your comment on, there was an article published in the European Journal of Pediatrics, October of 2024, Homeopathy versus Conventional Care in Children During the First 24 Months of Life, a pragmatic randomized controlled trial. I'm guessing you've heard of that article?
Yes, I've read the article.
Okay, perfect. It seems from my perusal of it that children treated homeopathically were much healthier than those who were treated conventionally. Can you just comment about that?
Yeah. So there's a lot of factors that are really important to understand. And, one of the most important things, I think, when it comes to how do you define health and how do you define, when someone is healthy, and particularly in a pediatric population, and what the conventional theory has been is that you're healthy if you avoid illness. So much of what we do conventionally is about trying to prevent someone from getting colds, trying to prevent someone from getting measles, chickenpox, mumps, all these childhood illnesses. There was an article published in the New England Journal of Medicine, I believe it was back in 2002, that looked at the incidence of acute illnesses versus the incidence of chronic illnesses in the United States. And they found that as all these acute illnesses were going down, all these chronic illnesses were going up. And this is a New England Journal of Medicine. This is not any, alternative medical journal. And the author was Bach, is B-A-C-H, I believe, was the study author. It turns out, lo and behold, the immune system needs exercise to be healthy. And that means you need experience. You need to actually get exposed to certain illnesses, to certain viruses, to certain bacteria in your environment, in your family, in your community, to build a healthy immune system. And we are finding, and we are going to touch, you do touch on the microbiome when you talk about this, but most conventional treatment is about protection, isolation, and trying to eliminate exposure, which doesn't do anything for the immune system. And then we throw antibiotics at people who are sick, and that's then shutting off the immune system. It lowers antibody production. It prevents the activation of the adaptive immune system. So it's doing all these things that are addressing acute inflammation, turning it off, and not activating the immune system. So the immune system ends up being like a couch potato. And the immune system is designed to develop inflammation. The first acute reaction that the immune system has, or the innate immune system has, is called inflammation. And that is used to fight infection. Well, if you always shut off inflammation, you end up getting chronic inflammation. The immune system keeps pushing back, as it always will, and it finally develops a chronic state of inflammation. And that's what we're seeing in kids. So when you're asking why are homeopathically treated kids healthier than conventionally treated kids, you have a bunch of different reasons. And one of them is you're actually allowing their bodies to do more of the work, and their bodies and their immune systems are recovering, and they're getting stronger. It's like sending them to the gym and they're building muscles. Whereas when they're getting an antibiotic every time, the immune system doesn't do anything. It gets sidelined. Every time you go out for the big game, you're going to sit on the bench again. You're going to sit on the bench again. Eventually, the immune system gets so frustrated, it just starts attacking the body. And we see autoimmunity.
You spoke about how you can't get homeopathic treatments published in the US.
Yeah.
And I, of course, ran into that with my own data. I was trying to compare vaccinated to unvaccinated, couldn't get it published. Finally got one published, gets retracted. They pull my license, all that nonsense.
Yes.
In my experience, because I did sort of push back a little bit and say, hey, wait a minute, I'm noticing unvaxxed kids are incredibly healthy. I'm curious, as a homeopath child yourself, and then now going into that field, did you use homeopathy in your family? Did you avoid vaccines? And maybe what your experience was as relates to the overall health of kids and families who maybe avoid the mainstream approach of vaccines and antibiotics, et cetera.
I was raised, my father was a homeopath, and raised all of us kids using homeopathic medicines. And I did the same with my kids. And I never saw a pediatrician until I think I was 13, I don't know, maybe 11 or 12 years old. I sprained my wrist. And then when I was 11 or 12 or 13, I cut my foot and had to go to the emergency room, and, different things like that. But no, I never had that experience of going in for any kind of a routine pediatric checkup. It just wasn't done in our family. And of course, now the studies are beginning to suggest that, we know that the reason why kids are going to see their pediatricians is so they can keep them on their vaccine schedules. In my experience, kids are much healthier if they're not seeing doctors, particularly conventional form, and they are much healthier using, homeopathy, herbs, natural medicine whenever they can. Everything depends upon the nature of your illness. If you have a congenital heart problem, you're not going to see a permanent cure from homeopathic medicine. There's limitations,
Sure.
You thank goodness we do have a conventional system of medicine and surgery that will handle these things and handles them wonderfully. If you're in a car accident, first take a dose of arnica if you can. But if you have a life-threatening condition, the hospital, the trauma center is the best place for you, because these guys are mobile MASH units that are trained to put you back together, and put you back together they do, and they can do it exceptionally well. So it's not for everything. You have to know when to use it and when not to. And unfortunately, most people are unaware of what homeopathy can do. And there's a severe lack of education and information about what homeopathy can do. But it could replace the majority of what's done in a pediatric office. In fact, most routine care can be done using homeopathic medicine quite effectively, quite safely, and it will promote long-term health rather than lead to its deterioration.
Wow. Well, I back you 100%, because I've seen the disaster that general pediatrics has been for our children and the development of the chronic disease you were talking about. To wrap this episode up, and I'll have you back soon to cover that other topic. Feel free to share your website, if you will, and hopefully you don't get too inundated with too much business. But we don't know where to start to find a good homeopath, so if you have any tips, and we'll wrap this up.
I would go to the American Institute of Homeopathy, has a website, and on the very top of their screen, it says find a homeopath. The National Center for Homeopathy has a Find a Provider directory. The North American Society of Homeopaths has a Find a Practitioner directory. And the one I always forget, and I always regret it, I apologize, is the Homeopathic Academy of Naturopathic Physicians, also will provide referrals to homeopaths. And then there are homeopathic nurses. There are homeopathic physician's assistants. There are homeopathic veterinarians for your animals and pets. So it's not just human medicine that homeopathy covers.
I wish I was a homeopath.
You can still be one.
I might have to do that. Just
never too old.
Never too late. I want to thank you, Dr. Whitmont, so much for sharing all this information with us. And I'm going to get you back on the show very soon.
Pleasure to talk to you, Paul.
Thanks for watching, folks. Don't miss the next episode. We're going to dive into some really good material that will round out the entire picture of how to keep your kids healthy. I'm the author of VaxFacts, vaxfactsbook.com, and I'm available for coaching as well at kidsfirstforever.com. I look forward to seeing you next week.
We are live, so if you can tell us your name, please.
Hi, my name's Catherine Green.
Catherine, and this is a Vax story in your family, so let's go through them.
Okay, so my mother was born 1919. In her family, her father believed vaccines to be a dangerous, experimental, risky choice, and he would not allow any of his children to be vaccinated. My mother did have her childhood illnesses. At times they were severe. She always recovered completely. She had 7 children. She was the healthiest human being I've ever known. She worked every day of her life, and she helped clean rooms and rent rooms in my father's and hers hotel business, while she had 7 children, cooked for 9 to 11 people 2 to 3 times a day.
I'm just going to put this on you.
Okay, so she did receive some vaccines when she entered the Women's Army Corps, but at that point I think she was 24 years old. So she had a fully developed immune system. She was not a child. She was not impacted in any negative way. She lived to be 91. She died of heart disease after 10 years or more of missing my dad, who passed earlier. So Mom was shockingly healthy. When a flu or a cold virus would go around, my mother would never catch it. I would get sick and become very ill, have a hard time recovering. She would never get ill, except for occasionally, maybe for 24 hours. She'd say, "Oh, I don't feel very good," and she'd go lie down. And then a day later, she's back out and 100%. I couldn't understand it, frankly, when I was young, why my mother was so healthy. And frankly, I was not that healthy. So I was the youngest of 7, born 1960. I got the regular DTaP, the one that was discontinued in America and replaced, and I got polio and smallpox. After the vaccines, I became very sick myself. I got severe bronchitis, was in and out of the hospital at times with tonsillitis, and didn't do very well, frankly. So it took my immune system, I would say, a few years to recover. I really didn't get fully healthy until I started living outdoors a lot more in my 20s when I was breeding and raising horses. So that was my story. My immune system did kind of bounce back, but it never had the resiliency of my mom's. My daughter was born 1995. She received 1 set of vaccines. It set up some childhood issues, seemingly minor according to doctors, but very disturbing to us. She developed very severe colic. She cried for hours and hours every night of the world. Nothing could console her. She also developed very severe diaper rash that was almost impossible to control and caused her a lot of suffering. After that first initial set at about 2 months of age, and after she recovered, and the doctors never had any solutions for what was troubling her then, I frankly didn't take her back to them. I didn't feel good about it. I didn't understand why not, but I didn't feel good. When she entered school in K4, I was told that she would never go to school in the state of Florida if she didn't receive all the CDC recommended vaccines. We embarked. I didn't understand this. Wasn't the truth. I didn't know that it wasn't the truth at that time. This is 99, and I found a doctor who would at least space them out. Some doctors wanted to give them all, They frankly seem to believe that they can't do harm despite what's in those needles and syringes. After the first set, she wound up in the hospital with pneumonia. She was very, very severely ill. They gave her so many antibiotics, IV, the most powerful ones they had. She was wrung out like a rag doll after that. The next set, again, she got severely ill. It wasn't labeled. Took 3 different courses of antibiotics to cure that. Third set, she developed chickenpox very, very badly. Went through that. This is now the spring of the end of the school year for K4. And that summer, she was not the same child. It had just dragged her system down so severely. She was allergic to everything under the sun. Every single bite of food made her stomach hurt. It was really tough. By the end of the summer, she was a little better. There was 1 set left that they required. She took that, and it was just like you had knocked the child to the ground, okay? And she became this thin stick figure with great black circles under her eyes, constant stomach pain, constant rhinitis, constant infections. It was just terrible. I had taken a flawlessly healthy child at 4 to the physician. At 5, I had a child I didn't know could survive in this world. I was afraid she'd wind up in a bubble, allergic to everything under the sun. So I had to find another solution, and that's what we did, Polly. We started finding people who were out in the outer skirts of medicine, but they were doing alternative therapies, they were using herbs, they were using actual electrical impulses to try to discover what was wrong with the child through the acupuncture meridians of the body. We found that she was allergic to most foods. We took all those foods out. I didn't know if this was going to work. We were just trying it, but once I took all those foods out, her health started to improve. She could eat a little better. She started having a hamburger patty, broccoli, and a sweet potato for breakfast every morning. This was not your average American breakfast, but she did so well because it took out all the allergens. And of course, she got picked on and teased at school because none of the normal things were in her lunch boxes ever, because she was sickly still often. She had rhinitis chronically all her youth. It was really a tough go. And even as a young woman, she has suffered with chronic infections. I know that the damage to her immune system was done by those repeated toxic vaccines. There is no question in my mind. Just like I know that my mother's abounding great good health, one of the primary reasons was she was not vaccinated as a child at all. If our nation doesn't start comprehending what we're doing, I really think there is no future. We need our children to be healthy. So that's my vaxxed, unvaxxed story.
It's amazing. Amen to that. So if a young mum was in front of you right now, mother to mother, what would you say to her? Because we've got no time to sugarcoat this anymore.
It's poison. That's what I would say. They're needles full of genetic toxins, autoimmune system activations that we don't need to repeat on babies. We're vaccinating pregnant women today, which is another horror. On a side note, I was in the thoroughbred breeding industry for a number of years, and I talked to the guys who were handling the $1 million mares, the mares that you pay $1 or $2 or $3 million for, and you breed to stallions that the stud fee is $500,000 or more, the top mares on earth. You know what those mares get? Nothing. Nothing. No vaccines, no hormones, no drugs unless they need to save their life. These people know. We are intervening too much in Mother Nature. We're putting too many toxins in, neurotoxins. There's all kinds of retroviruses. There's so many contaminants. There's human DNA contaminants, by my understanding, in some of our vaccines. I also studied homeopathy. When you start thinking about what you're actually doing from a homeopathic perspective, no wonder our children are not okay, so many of them. So I know it's hard. It took me 20 years of studying this to understand how bad it really is. But we need to face this and stop doing it. And it's very difficult because the doctors themselves, frankly, are brainwashed. Our poor pediatrician, all he did was look vaguely puzzled. He didn't understand. I would bring in a healthy child, and then next thing you know, in 2 to 4 weeks, I had a very, very ill child. So they don't understand. They're told they cannot hurt the children. It's not true. If you just look at what's in the needles, you can see that that doesn't make any logical sense. I personally consider it magical thinking to think we can inject all those poisons into children and babies and newborns and they'll be okay. It's absurd. But you have to find it out for yourself, in my experience.
Extraordinary, your family went from being pure unvaccinated blood to where you are now.
The whole Monty. And the worst part is it's hard to reach these young people because my daughter was starting off in her career when they brought out the toxic mRNA jabs. And despite going through that as a 4-year-old, and frankly, she's not going to remember it the way I do, she went ahead and took those too in order to work, to begin her career. She seems to be okay. Her allergies have picked up again strongly,
What
but
did she
she's
get,
young.
Pfizer or Moderna?
She got Pfizer, 3 doses.
How can we stop her from doing any more?
I don't know.
Okay.
I think she's got it now because I've been warning her all her life. And the fact of the matter is she's seeing some people drop that are young that shouldn't, no one close. You know, I keep praying for her friends and herself. And some of her friends had menstrual trouble with it, right? But I think they got relatively low toxic doses in her region. It's odd. Some areas have a lot more injuries than others, it seems to me. But I'm on pins and needles. If my daughter dies because of it, I will not be surprised. You can't be. Logically, you cannot be. I know it's not common, actually, that the young people are dropping. We have seen this huge increase, but it's still not as if, you know, we're losing 1 out of 100 or 1 out of 50 people who took it, in my opinion. But it's hard to watch. Time will tell.
Catherine, thank you for everything you do for us, because you're also head of the Oregon chapter for Children's Health Defense, so thank you for everything.
I so appreciate Children's Health Defense. I didn't frankly understand what happened to my own daughter until I heard Bobby Kennedy talking about the Guinea-Bissau study and little girls and how they were dying at 5 to 10 times the rate if they were vaccinated. Not from the diseases they were being vaccinated for, but from other opportunistic infections like pneumonia and sepsis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is what happened to my girl. I about fell off my chair. I finally understood it. And then I found Dr. David Ayub, Dr. Paul, and everybody in between who's been telling the truth on this topic, despite the tremendous costs of telling the truth on the forbidden topic in America, and frankly, what used to be, in my opinion, the free world, which is not free anymore.
That's right. Catherine, thank you.
You're welcome.